Hey, Grand Ascension, everybody. It's me, Carolyn Denise, back with another reading from the Scrolls of Hayah. And this is from the latest of Claudio Nocelli. And I've reached out to him, but he hasn't reached back out to me. So I don't know. He could be beyond the ice walls, and he could very well be here in the known lands. We don't know. Let me get into chapter 3. I'm not going to keep you guys today too long. I just want to read a couple of chapters with you. And we're going to just put some pieces together. So chapter 3 is called The Experimental Lands. Joel adopted a completely different posture, as if the interview had just begun anew at the precise moment, and everything before was merely introduction. His gaze drifted into a void again, but his words flowed with a melancholic tone. Something was troubling him deeply, and we were about to uncover it. Claudio, I've seen things I can't erase from my mind, Joel declared. Among them are islands that don't appear on any conventional map. They lie between southern Argentina, Chile, and the Antarctic Peninsula. But these lands aren't ordinary. They're not natural, he paused, as though searching for the right words to describe what he knew. Some call them the experimental lands. I fear they, the custodians, created division between the continents in the not-so-distant past. Many maps from before 1728, which is the last reset when humanity was forcibly restarted. I'm going to pause it right there. This is not in Claudio's book. I'm just giving you just drops of nuggets or knowledge, tea, as some people want to call it. You need to go do the research. The last reset was around the Tartarian times. That's where you see all these grand, beautiful, magnificent buildings. And if you do your research, you will come to the conclusion that there were not a lot of light-skinned or pale-skinned people at that time. There were a few, but not very many. Predominantly, the world was melanated. All around the world, all continents were dark-skinned people. And the murder that took place and the atrocities took place against our people, right? We were the ones that created the technology and built the buildings. And there's a lot of whitewashing that has gone on. And I'm not saying it to be hateful, but when you start to go down the rabbit hole and you start to look at things, you'll form that opinion as you go. All right. And there are some people that have a difficult time acknowledging that fact. Okay. But it's the truth. And that's the history that's been whitewashed and it's been changed. Okay. So the fall of Tartary was worldwide. It was dark-skinned, melanated people. There were some light-skinned, I don't say white, light-skinned people that were here, but the predominantly were dark-skinned people. That's when they ushered in with these different experiments. And we had different experiments going on. And at that point in time, with the experiments, you had people, the autochthonous people all across this world, or dome, right, that were murdered. And what you don't see is a lot of the history that alludes to that. I mean, if you go look at museums and things like that, I apologize, you guys. If you go look at museums and histories and things like that, you'll see that offline. Okay, let's see it. You'll see that during that time frame, you'll see paintings and things like that in cathedrals and museums of dark-skinned people. Like Mary was dark-skinned. The bones and things that you're finding all around the world that these anthropologists and whomever dig up, like the Smithsonian Institute, is of our people. Okay. So, you've got a lot of whitewashing of history, and I'm not saying it to be hateful. I'm just saying it's truth. I mean, you can see it, especially when you know what they did from this last reset when they came over here to this land and they reclassified our people 6 times. I'm not getting off topic. I'm just letting you know that everything we've been taught is a lie, right? And so when you understand that, then you can start to assimilate the information appropriately, right? You have to question everything. But the autochthonous or melanated people were all around the world, and we created these grand cities and big buildings and the technology and things like that you see. And millions of us were murdered at that time during the last reset in 1728. All right. And that's when they came over here in the Americas and blew up and just created havoc all around the world. And you got one set group of people doing that under the guise of these parasites, custodians, non-human entities. And the last thing I want to state is when you get to 1728, that's where you get a lot of the records that have been misled, but you got a lot of churches, a lot of people that did keep records of the autochthonous people in this land. So I tell people to do their genealogy. You have to go back a certain amount of time frame to see that your family was already here in the Americas before the fall of Tartary and before the last reset and before the colonization of America. Okay, it's just a little knowledge. It's not in Claudio's book. That's my own assessment, and I'm just sharing it with you guys. So it says, the last reset, when humanity was forcibly restarted, showed that the southern regions of these lands were connected to what is now called the Antarctic Peninsula, what many once referred to as Terra Australis. By dividing these lands, new islands were created, separated from the two continents, America and Antarctica. And America is known as Atriel or Atlantis, okay? His voice grew graver with these words, and I could sense the weight of their implications, perhaps even terrifying ones. At that moment, my eyes must have betrayed my thoughts, though I managed to speak. Experimental lands? I asked, reflecting aloud, though I was already aware of his territories where various experiments took place. Who better than a seasoned military man before me to confirm it? Joel nodded slowly and then pulled something from his jacket. It was an image of what appeared to be an old map in yellow paper filled with the hand-drawn marks and annotations. He folded it up. He unfolded it on the table between us, and my eyes locked into it immediately. There were unfamiliar lines, shapes of islands I had never seen depicted this way. It bore no resemblance to the official maps or even to those I had studied on the unknown lands. This map came to me during a mission from a comrade who is no longer with us, he said solemnly. These lands are connected in some way to what we discussed earlier, the line of absolute zero. Don't ask me how, because even I don't fully understand it, but what happens there is more disturbing than anyone can imagine. I leaned forward, studying the map's details as Joel continued. Experimental lands connected to the portion of the Antarctic near absolute zero. Truly fascinating, I thought to myself. These lands were either created or altered by the parasites, aka the custodians, non-human entities, and the elites, okay, with the complicity of certain humans. Experiments take place there, Claudio. Experiments that combine advanced technology with the phenomena that defies our understanding. Worse still, these islands are also used to train soldiers and test weapons, but not against human enemies. No, against something much greater. I lifted my gaze from the map to meet his eyes. Against giants? Joe, against the giants? I asked. He leaned closer, his face shadowed by dark memories. Yes, against the giants, the ones they call the Patagons. But they're not the same ones mentioned in the ancient lands of Patagonia. These have been genetically modified, Claudio. There's nothing left of the real ancient Patagons, at least not in these lands. These are creatures standing 11.5 to 13 feet tall, designed to serve as combat machines. It's as if they're in a state of deep torpor, struggling just to survive. The custodians and their allies created them. I'm almost certain of it. They've been using them in those lands, pitting them against human soldiers in what can only be described as a perverse game. And yet something even greater hides behind all these experiments, something much bigger. Like the movie Predator, where they have these people that they drop into that island, right, to this world, and then the predator hunts them down single-handedly, one by one, and destroys each one of them. Go check that movie out if you haven't seen it. It's like Predator 3 or 4. So they put everything in movies to tell us what they're doing, right? And they've been leading up to this for a very long time. I know this sounds fantastical to some of you, and you guys are going to say, oh, this is hogwash. It's not true. I'm simply telling you that's why you need to fast. You need to go within, and you need to ascend. Because once you become entangled with the creator of all, you will get your answers to everything you need, right? You will be able to connect the dots more clearly. So then it says, the air grew heavier as I proceeded his words. The implications were devastating, confirming suspicions I'd held for some time. Advanced technology was not only being used to manipulate nature, but also to sacrifice human lives in what could only be described as a horror show. Okay? They've been doing it for a long time, you guys. Why? I asked, struggling to find logic in what I was hearing. What do you think is the purpose of this? Joel ran his hands over his face. It's a testing ground. Modern combat weapons, custodial technology, and human resilience are all tested there. But that's not all. They're also experimenting with the visions I mentioned earlier, though to a lesser extent. than at the line of absolute zero. I'm not sure how it works, but these lands allow for visions, not of distant futures, but of immediate outcomes, enabling quick, correct decisions. What they see are fragments of something greater, something they don't want us to know. I can't even confirm if all those giants are real or if they're fabricated projections somehow connected to this nexus. But for now, let's leave this topic here. With so much information, you start doubting everything. Okay? And here's a map that he shows here. So there's the ice walls, and here's the continent right there. A small island, I should say, a small island. He says, but for now, let's leave this topic here. With so much information, you start doubting everything. Okay? And he goes on to say, Joel fell silent for a moment before adding, some of my comrades who were in those lands shared the experiences before they disappeared. Disappeared, I asked, astonished. Yes, all of them, Claudio. But before they vanished, they spoke of shadows walking among them, lights in the sky that they didn't seem of this world. Sometimes they saw red lights hovering motionless in the sky, perhaps drones, or what they described as trumpet sounds coming from above. There was a constant feeling of being watched. None of them returned the same. Did they say anything else about these drones? And they mentioned a rain of lights. But at that time, we didn't even know what a drone was. Do you understand? They described static lights in the skies moving in all directions. Thousands of them would fall toward the ground and into the water, making it nearly impossible to rest during the long nights. It was hell, worse than any war. I looked back at the map, trying to grasp the scale of what he was describing. These experimental lands were more than just secret. They were an abyss, a place where the boundaries of morality and humanity had become erased, yet somehow interconnected. Joel, why are you telling me all this? I finally asked, my voice quieter than I expected, hoping to pull him away from those tragic and disturbing memories for a moment. He lifted his gaze and answered with a complete certainty. Because someone needs to know. Because this can't remain in dark forever. And because you, Claudio, I believe you have the capacity to do something truly valuable with all this information. It aligns too closely with what you've seen, or what you've been studying for years. I remained silent. Joe was entrusting me with the knowledge I couldn't ignore. A truth that carried a crushing weight, but also an inevitable responsibility. His revelations reinforced theories about the secret lands in the far south and the countless mysteries surrounding them. And that was chapter 3, okay? I'm going to try to read chapter 4 because I don't want to stay on here too long, you guys. Let's get into chapter 4, the encounter at the sea. Joe now began to recount his own experience, leaving behind what he had heard from others and the visions they had described. What he was about to share was firsthand details of a mysterious line of absolute zero. It was several years ago, during one of the strangest missions I was ever assigned. We were patrolling a remote southern zone in the icy waters that seemed endless. That region was classified as a total exclusion. No civilians, no merchant ships, no one but us was allowed to approach certain latitudes. Even we had to report back to base at regular intervals and was prohibited from deviating from the predefined route. He paused, his thoughtful gaze shifting to a small window where raindrops pounded and streaked silently down the glass, as though searching in the darkness outside for something only he could see in his memories. It was midsummer, but the cold there is unimaginable. The wind cuts like a blade, and the sea is an abyss, dark and sinister. That's how I've always described it to anyone who's asked about the icy waters of Antarctica. That night, the calm was unsettling. It was unusual to even move in these waters. The crew was on high alert, not because of any specific danger, but because in those latitudes, you always know something can go wrong in an instant. All it takes is a second and you end up in the freezing ocean where the waters feel like needles piercing your skin. I know this from experience. At that moment, Joel showed me large reddish scars on his hand and his forearm, remnants of an ordeal from the past. He lowered his voice, almost as if he didn't want anyone else to hear, as if someone else might be standing there with us. Everything changed when it appeared on radar. At first, it was just a small dot, an object we couldn't identify. It moved at a speed that made no sense for a vessel in those waters, especially given the ice conditions. But then we saw it. It emerged on the horizon, a dark shadow breaking the monotony of the ice. But the strange thing was Its speed, it seemed to hover over the ice. We couldn't see how it was cutting through. It didn't touch the water. It didn't seem to touch anything at all. I swear, I've never seen anything like it. I still think that while it resembled a vessel in shape, it wasn't a vessel at all. It kept sliding, coming towards us with a speed that left us petrified. What did you do? I asked, unable to contain myself, imagining myself in a place for a moment. Joe's expression darkened and he shrugged a moment that seemed to come from the depths of his being. What could we do, Claudio? There was no time to maneuver or escape. The captain ordered everyone to put on life vests and brace for impact. There was no other option. The vessel was upon us before we could even comprehend what it was. We prepared to die, and that's the truth. A death in the south, likely to be reported as something like military vessel lost to severe weather in the ice waters of Antarctica. He paused, as if reliving that moment. Then his voice dropped to an even quieter whisper. And then the impossible happened. That vessel, it passed through us, not as a collision. It literally passed through us as if we weren't there. It lasted a second, maybe less, but it left a mark on us for life. His eyes locked into mine, filled with an intensity I would never forget. Claudio, sound. The sound wasn't of this world. It was a low but resonant in your bones and your mind. I can't put it into words. And the sensations that followed were terrifying. Everyone in the crew collapsed. Some vomited, others cried. I fell to my knees and closed my eyes, and then it was as if I left my body for a moment. I wasn't there anymore. I remember seeing the vessel as I rose higher, moving farther and farther away. I saw my own body below, the captain beside me, and the others suffering on the starboard side and all over the ship. Everything happened in slow motion. I thought to myself, if that's my body, then where am I? What did you see after that? I asked, feeling a chill run through me. The experience he described was deeply unsettling. People burning, screaming in flames that they didn't consume their bodies but caused them immense pain. It was a terror I can't describe. Later, when I spoke to others who had traveled to the lands I mentioned before, they told me my visions didn't even compare to what they had seen. It felt as though I was witnessing something that had happened or something that was about to happen, but it wasn't us. It wasn't the crew. They were people I didn't recognize. Though at the beginning, I had seen my body as I rose. The rest was strange. Doctors will call it a post-traumatic stress disorder, but if that's true, what traumatic event had we experienced? That dark vessel was real, and it passed through us. Afterward, they tried to cover it all up, and we were never allowed to speak of it again. I remained silent, trying to process what I had just heard. Joel took a deep breath, attempting to steady himself before continuing. Through the memory of those visions had clearly shaken him. He pressed on nonetheless. When I opened my eyes, I saw the captain in the same state. He was trying to stay upright, but was stumbling as though all the strength had left him in an instant. We drifted for 5 days. Do you understand? 5 cursed days. Trying to recover while the ship simply floated aimlessly. He paused, his voice breaking, and tears began to run down his face. There were 12 of us in the crew, and all of us suffered physically in some way. We later learned that they had been searching for us and trying to make contact, but the nights, I repeated, trying to understand what he meant. Joel nodded slowly. 5 nights of vivid dreams I'd never had before. Dark-robed figures appeared to me with messages I didn't want to hear, and I wasn't ready to listen back. They warned me to change the ship's course, saying that something worse would happen if we didn't. But it wasn't just that. There was something in their words I can't explain. It was as if they knew every corner of my mind, every fear, every doubt. It felt like seeing myself in a creature that carried death and desolation. I fell silent again, letting Joel process his words. This wasn't just a story. It was a confession, an emotional release of something that had haunted him for years. It was a memory he couldn't forget and would carry with him to his last day. The captain tried to calm me. The captain tried to keep me calm, but he was affected too. I could see it in his eyes, even if he didn't want to admit it. I suppose that's typical of captains and leaders in general. Those nights changed everything for me. We weren't the same after that encounter, and to be honest, we would never be again. The intensity in Joel's voice left me speechless. I knew there were deeper layers to his experience yet to be revealed, and I was profoundly intrigued by what lay ahead in his story. The fate of Joel and the entire crew after the unsettling encounter with that dark vessel in the frozen oceans. I clung to one phrase he had uttered during his out-of-body experience. If that's my body, then what am I? And that's all of chapter 4. So I've read 3 and 4. This is very, very intriguing to me, you guys. Let's read chapter 5 and I'm going to wrap it up. I'm at almost 20 minutes. Chapter 5, The Inner Darkness, Messages from the Departed. In situations as drastic as this, drifting in the middle of nowhere, utterly lost, both in our surroundings and without ourselves, while wandering aimlessly between bow and stern and confusion, the mind searches for refuge, Joel began. For me, that refuge was trying to recall my family, imagining myself wrapped in their embrace. But to my dismay, even focusing on such simple thoughts felt nearly impossible. As incredible as it may sound, I couldn't fully remember my family. It took me days to do so. Thoughts that anyone else might recall in milliseconds required immense effort, a grueling battle with my own mind. As the days passed and things began to normalize somewhat, we tried to convince ourselves that nothing had happened, that we had simply lost our way. My mind, eager to close this wound, tried to rationalize the experience as though something sent to help me explore the depths of my inner self, the darkness that exists within us all, and the light that sometimes struggles to bring balance. During those 5 or 6 days, I had the deepest and most peculiar thoughts of my life condensed into a short span. Later, I realized how fortunate we were not to end up at the bottom of the ocean. Joel took a deep breath before continuing. His eyes, though glistening, looked weary yet calmer. They fixed on an interminate point in the distance, as if the submerging once were into memory. Those 5 nights he began, didn't just leave physical scars, they destroyed us from within. As I mentioned before, each of us experienced something different. Joel lowered his gaze to his hands, his fingers fidgeting nervously or perhaps searching for the right words to describe what was next. Or what came next. The dark-robed figures kept appearing in my dreams, each night more vivid than last. These weren't mere visions. They were there in my cabin, speaking directly to my soul. They issued orders telling me I had to change the ship's course or we'd all die that very day. But I didn't believe them. They carried an aura I can only describe as absolute heaviness, pure malevolence. And bear in mind, I've always been a skeptic when it comes to energies and such things. Did you tell your crewmates about what you were seeing? I asked. I mentioned it to the captain, Charlie. I want his name to be remembered, Joel said with solemnity. But he didn't want to hear it. He was a seasoned man, someone who had weathered storms and dangers at sea. Yet what we had experienced with that dark vessel had affected him more than he cared to admit. He tried to maintain composure as a great leader would, but I could tell he was seeing the same things too. I saw him faltering, muttering to himself as if he locked in an internal struggle. One morning, I found him outside during a heavy storm, murmuring and waving his hands as though fighting against the nothingness. Joel leaned forward, his hands clenched to his fists, seemingly relieving the pain. Each night was worse than the last. The creatures didn't just speak anymore. They walked among us on the ship as if physically present. Images of an apocalyptic future haunted me repeatedly. Seas of blood, skies devoid of stars with only shadows moving slowly as though keeping watch. They told me humanity was in danger, trapped in a prison without realizing it. But their words weren't a warning. They felt more like a threat, as though this was all planned to steer my destiny towards some kind of revelation. Years later, I'd come to interpret it that way. Back then, I couldn't make sense of it. I just kept turning it over and over in my mind. A chill ran down my spine. Joe spoke with such intensity that doubting his words was impossible. Yet it was clear these experiences had been a profound mark on him. Could these dreams be guiding Joel towards something greater? And if so, what were these beings' true intentions? How did these others react, I asked, hoping to keep him talking. Joel shook his head slowly, his face showing a hint of defeat. Most tried to ignore it. Some mentioned strange dreams, but no one wanted to go into detail. It was as if everyone knew something was pursuing us, but no one wanted to admit it. They were too fighting internal battles, trying to extinguish the hellfire consuming us slowly. We spent the days talking about trivial things, trying to distract ourselves. But every night, the fear returned. It was as if the dark vessel had pierced our souls, leaving a crack through which these things could enter. Our ship felt like a portal to hell. Drifting aimlessly while we served as the nexus to something incredibly dark. He fell silent for a moment, and a second tear rolled down his cheek. Seeing a man of such military experience hardened by countless near-death situations, utterly broken, was striking. I understood perfectly how he felt. In moments like these, our profound love and empathy flow through us, coupled with the eternal struggle against bitter experiences manifesting as tears and a deep sadness. Joel quickly wiped his face and resumed, as though trying to mask his emotional break. On the 5th night, I had a different dream. I didn't see the creatures, nor did I hear their voices. Instead, I saw a figure. Though I didn't recognize them at first, I felt within me that I had always known them. They stood before a massive wall of ice, pointing with one hand. Their face excluded serenity, yet their eyes seemed to hold an ocean of sadness and wisdom. When I approached, they spoke to me. They said something I'll never forget. I leaned forward, my eyes widening in anticipation of what was coming. Joe looked at me with a mix of emotion and fear. The price of truth. This great sometimes means losing everything, but I know you're willing to pay it. Behind the figure, the ice began to crack, revealing a brilliant blue light. Then his face became illuminated, and I recognized him. It was my late father, who had left this world years ago. A heavy silence filled the room. The weight of Joel's words resonated not just in my mind, but also in my heart. Joel took a deep breath, allowing the moment to settle before continuing. When I woke up, I was drenched in cold sweat, my heart pounding as if I just ran a marathon. Looking around, I saw the captain was awake too. His bloodshot eyes suggested he had been crying. Neither of us said a word, but I knew in the moment that he had seen something as well, something he didn't want to share, at least not then. Eventually, he confessed to me. The captain had seen his 5-year-old daughter, who had passed away years prior. Joel leaned back in the chair, running his hands over his head, as if still trying to make sense of it all. What else can you do in the moment like that? He asked, rhetorically, before continuing. That night, I saw my captain completely broken. Our leader had fallen, and this man was strong as a rock. This transcended any barrier. He paused then and mused. Could these icy waters be a connection to the depths of death? Probably. They're using everything that's in the corner of your mind and your essence of your soul. So these beings have the technology, and they are using the ether. They're using the absolute 0 point area to tap into these people and to utilize this for evil intentions, right? I believe you can probably use it for good intentions as well, but they've mastered the evilness, all right? This is no game. This is real, all right? Whether you all know it or not. It's not about a belief. Belief is a lack of knowledge and knowing. It's knowing that this is true, that this is actually happening right before our eyes, and we are in danger. All of us are, and we don't even know it, okay? So he says, Claudio, he continued, his voice steady but laced with conviction. That vessel wasn't of this world. What it did to us wasn't an accident. It was a message, a warning of something much greater. But the question I've asked myself ever since is, why us? Why did they appear to a group of simple sailors? What did they want from us? And why were we seeing the faces of loved ones who were no longer among us? There's something using it against them. They're testing out the technology. They're in this area. They saw them and they utilized it. That's just simple. That's my assessment based on what I'm reading with you, okay? Then it says, I realized these questions weren't just Joel's. They were mine as well. What I had just heard wasn't merely a story. It was a puzzle, and each piece seemed to draw us closer to a truth not yet ready to be unveiled. After another brief pause, Joel turned to me with a desperate need for understanding. What do you think about all of this? Why did my father and other loved ones appear in those dreams? Could it all be a part of the experiment by the custodians? Of course. Of course. Of course. These are dark, malevolent beings. Yes. Yes. Of course. And it says, I didn't know what to say to such a profound question. It didn't feel like the right moment to offer theories about something as delicate as death. Prudence seems the best course. The only comment I could make without claiming expertise was based on the experiences and stories I've heard, along with Joel's subsequent contact with those close to Butler. These dreams might have stemmed from a struggle between his soul's connection to the celestial lands and the cryptic messages of the custodians after the vessel encounter. However, everything indicated that during these 6 days, multiple battles were waged, not only within the crew, but also externally. The loss of their self-images coupled with the visions of deceased loved ones was undeniably transformative. transcendence. In my humble opinion, they had won a great internal battle, forging a profound bond of love within their inner source. It's possible that the visions of their loved ones were genuine messages delivered at a time and place uniquely suited to receiving them. On the other hand, the dark creatures wrapped in the shadow conveyed an imposing message, perhaps reflecting another force attempting to influence Joel or a representative of the custodians themselves as wholly negative entities. If these messages came from the custodians or the dark vessel, they likely would have taken a different form, using the type of psychological manipulation. As we continue Joel's account, we'll uncover more about this connection. And I'm going to stop it right there because we've read 3 through 5. And so when I come back again, you guys, we're going to get into chapter 6. And chapter 6, it says here, let me tell you, the fragment of the dome. Okay, so we've read 3, 4, and 5, okay, and chapter 6 is coming up, and I'm really trying not to jump ahead, but I want to show you this face. That is what we're dealing with. 1 of 9, okay, 1 of 9 beings, all right. If you've joined me when I read Murder of Reality, and, you know, I haven't read that in a couple of days, so I am going to get back into it this weekend coming up, and we're going to deep dive into a couple of chapters of that. But everything that I read, I'm mapping it together, laying it out together for you guys in puzzle pieces, and it's up to you to go do your research and purchase the books, do the research, and not just be Google masters. I mean, literally go into libraries, go to websites, get into some discussion groups, and really dig and see what you can find, okay? You know, that's what we're dealing with. That face that I showed you, there's 9 different races that are here within this earth dome. And I dare say there's other creatures that walk among us too. I know that may sound fantastical to some of you. I'm just simply saying you've got to do your research and you got to do some soul searching within yourself. Something is incredibly wrong within this dome, within these ice walls, within the known lands. And it's not just the U.S. government. It's all the governments around the world. And it's one set group of beings, one set group of quote unquote humans, right? Mankind that's leading us, and non-human entities that are over the elites, that are pushing the buttons. And so we are just basically playthings to them at this point. I know how that sounds, but that's why I'm always, you know, reading certain topics or reading over certain things and having discussions to point you in the direction to where we need to get to in a higher state of consciousness to raise the vibration within these ice walls, right? We need to ascend. And the only way to escape this dome is through the connection of source, reconnecting with the creator of all, right? So anyway, I thank you guys for joining me. I don't want to take up too much of your time. We're right at 32 minutes. So when I come back, I'll start reading over that next chapter. And that chapter again is going to be chapter 6, the fragment of the dome. Okay. And that's the part that I'm going to pick up at. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great afternoon. And remember what I always say, be the change you want to see all around this dome, because it's up to you and I to make a positive change. We have to ascend. We don't have a choice anymore.